continues to escalate. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, has now said that it sees fierce fighting in the counteroffensive launched by Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, has also said that NATO's support makes a significant difference to Ukraine's counteroffensive. But NATO leaders have decided that the group will not issue an invitation for Ukraine to join the alliance at a summit in Vilnius in mid-July. Stoltenberg made the comments at the start of the two-day meeting of the alliance's defense ministers in Brussels, at which he said that they would discuss how to further ramp up defense production. At the same time, Stoltenberg warned against accepting a frozen conflict in Ukraine in return for an end to the war. He said, and I quote, "We all want this war to end, but a just peace cannot mean freezing the conflict and accepting a deal dictated by Russia."
At the Vilnius summit and in the preparations for the summit, we are not discussing to issue a formal invitation. What we are discussing is how to move Ukraine closer to NATO, and there are ongoing consultations, and I'm not in a position to preempt the outcome of those consultations. So the most important thing is that we have a significant increase in defense spending, and that we meet the capability targets which we agree which we have agreed in NATO. Let me add one brief thing, and that is that from my own experience as a politician, in Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, I know that it's never easy to increase defense spending, because if you spend more on defense, there's something less. There is less for healthcare, for education, for other important things.
In den Überschwemmungsgebieten in Bayern
We are not in a new Cold War, but we are neither in the strategic partnership we tried to develop with Russia after the end of the Cold War. What we see is a more assertive Russia. We don't see any imminent threat against any NATO ally, but we see a Russia which over a long period of time has invested heavily in defense capabilities, in modernizing their armed forces, and we have seen a Russia which has been willing to use military force to change borders in Europe for the first time since the end of the Second World War, with the illegal annexation of Crimea. And therefore NATO has to respond, and that's exactly what we are doing.
in den Überschwemmungsgebieten in Bayern
We are not in a new Cold War, but we are neither in the strategic partnership we tried to develop with Russia after the end of the Cold War. What we see is a more assertive Russia. We don't see any imminent threat against any NATO ally, but we see a Russia which over a long period of time has invested heavily in defense capabilities, in modernizing their armed forces, and we have seen a Russia which has been willing to use military force to change borders in Europe for the first time since the end of the Second World War, with the illegal annexation of Crimea. And therefore NATO has to respond, and that's exactly what we are doing.
And joining us on the broadcast is Valentin Yakushik of the Ukraine Institute of Politics. Thank you, Mr. Yakushik, for joining us on CNN News 18. Now, NATO has made it clear that it will not be extending a membership to Ukraine to join the military alliance. Is that a setback given the situation that Ukraine finds itself in, given the stalemate that we see between Russia and the Ukrainian forces, where it's pretty much a war of attrition between the two sides, and they're both bogged down in their positions?
Repetition of the position of NATO, that they are not ready to accept Ukraine now, only sometime later, after the war, it makes a lot of Ukrainian officials quite angry. Even the president of Ukraine initially said that he is not going to attend the NATO summit next month. But later he agreed he will go, because there is new promises of assistance, financial assistance, assistance in weapons, but his advisors are saying quite harsh words about the allies who want Ukrainians to continue the war by their own manpower, by the lives of Ukrainian soldiers and officers. For NATO, it's a logical position. They want to weaken Russia, and they want Russia to lose this war, but not by sending their own NATO countries' forces there on the territory of Ukraine. NATO is supplying a lot of military assistance, intelligence from satellites, from other sources. They provide teaching to Ukrainian, training for Ukrainian soldiers and officers. And there is a lot of other types of support to Ukraine, including financial. Probably half of Ukrainian budget is now based on the assistance from the Western allies. But Ukrainians experience big difficulties in having no guarantees from NATO as to future. So Ukrainians are quite more Europeans than many other European nations. Maybe with the exception, maybe Ukrainians can be compared to Finnish and Swedes, who decided to exchange their neutrality for NATO membership and for active countering Russia, to have the danger of being exposed to Russian nuclear weapons in the case of direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. Also, there is position of Poland, who are in fact ready to send their volunteers to Ukraine. It's not said openly, but what we hear from the former Secretary General of NATO, he said that if Ukraine experiences difficulties in its counterattack, so it was something, this message, then Polish and Baltic countries can send their own forces to Ukraine. So Ukraine is experiencing quite difficult situation when the forces between Russia and Ukraine in the battlefield are almost equal. And it depends now upon the next stage of assistance to Ukraine by weapons, and Ukrainian leadership also thinks, but real guarantees of Ukrainian security. So that's what will be demanded by Ukraine from NATO. But NATO, for its NATO countries, for the logical reasons, they do not want to get involved directly into fighting on the battlefield with Russia. Ukrainians will have to continue it. So the tragedy of Ukrainian nation and the tragedy of Russia continues. Tragedy which started on the 24th of February last year, but insane decision to attack Ukraine, to try to make a regime change which failed, which was not efficient at all. Ukrainians showed that they are a strong nation, their army is ready to fight till the end. And it shows that Ukrainians are invincible. So it's necessary to find the peaceful solution, to find a kind of compromise to stop the war. Ukrainian infrastructures are being destroyed. There is a danger of dissemination of war to other nations. Now it went to the neighboring regions of Russia, and there is danger of going the war to the other nations, to Belarus, to the neighboring Western countries. It should be a point of interest of every nation of the world, how to stop this war by peaceful measures and by finding a compromise to let Ukraine to be reintegrated as a democratic and pluralistic state, and to leave Russia chance to be safeguarded in its own borders, because now there is a danger for Russia, for its dismantling and for future degeneration. Right. India has the word to say. And what Mr. Blinken did in China it is an important step to understand that there is better to choose win-win strategies, not to go into confrontation. Some kind of win-win strategy should be used towards Ukraine and Russia to stop the war, because continuation of this war leads only to new tragedies. I do understand that now it's not possible during the nearest months or two, while there is time for battles, time for direct confrontation in the battlefield. But after this, when we see the results of Ukrainian counteroffensive, it is necessary to start serious peaceful attempts. It's good that many countries, including African countries now, try to find the solution. It's time when India, China, Africans, Brasilia have to find reasonable, possible, peaceful steps towards stopping war in Ukraine and creating real peace in Eastern Europe, and not to allow further contacts which can bring Europe on the brink of the nuclear warfare. There is soon time coming for real diplomacy, not only for guns to talk.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Yakushik, for sharing your comprehensive perspective on the situation when it comes to the Ukraine-Russian conflict.